Welcome to I Got a Question Conversations with Dr. S. Welcome to I Got a Question Conversations with Dr. S. Today, I have the pleasure, yay, of asking questions of my friend and fellow educator, Dr. Anissa Morency. Or as I call her, Dr. A. Dr. A, welcome to the podcast.
Hello, everyone.
All right, so before I get into any of my questions, I would love it if you introduce yourself to the people. So, whatever you feel comfortable sharing.
I am Dr. Anissa Morency. I have been in education for about 14 years. I've taught science all 14 years. I sometimes dub myself as the Black Miss Frizzle, those of you that watch the Magic School Bus series. Um, but I love science. I love teaching probably more than I love science. So science, as I say, was my gateway into education.
Love it, love it. And you have your EDD, right? When did you graduate with that?
Yes, last April
Okay,
23. So I
awesome.
at this point have, as I say, two master's degree, and as I say, one of them was on accident because I went back to get my principal certification, and the hours added up to another master's degree. So I have a master's of art and teaching, a master's in education and building administration, and an EDD in teacher leadership.
Okay, and currently you serve as.
I am currently the curriculum facilitator for science and art, and that's just like a coordinator. We help write curriculum, we help implement new curriculum, find resources for those departments for both science, art, and engineering in Kirkwood School District K-12.
Okay, so look, don't be leaving all that stuff out. We want to know all the deets.
Right.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing that about yourself. And that is amazing. So let's get into these questions. So, as people, me and you,
Mhm.
who clearly feel strongly about education, what was it that drew you into becoming an educator?
Mhm.
Was it some early experience or just, what kind of made you want to become an educator?
So interestingly enough, as I thought about this the other day, I have a pedigree. My grandfather was in education all of his career. He was retired by the time I came along, but he always talked about how he was a counselor and a teacher in this little small school district in Arkansas. And my mom taught first grade. She's classically trained as a nurse, but she taught first grade for about 7 years
Hmm.
when I was in middle school. And so, long story short, my deep dark secret is I never wanted to be a teacher. I wanted to be a medical doctor.
Hmm.
And I went through high school, college. That was my focus. That was my goal. And one of the things I say is that I was literally called into education because, like, 2 weeks before I was getting ready to graduate, we were signing, getting our, teachers and advisors to sign all our graduation paperwork. And I felt God saying, "You're not going into medicine, you're going into teaching." And I was like, "Oh, okay." And I mean, like, my bachelor's degree is in psychology, but I had always had the mindset or the goal to go to medical school. And so
Mhm.
I went to my advisor and I was like, "You know what? I don't want to go to medical school. I want to teach." And he literally face palmed himself. And so enrolled into a program in Arkansas, and then shortly after that, I moved to Missouri, where I finished my got certified and finished in 2015 with my teacher certification.
Wow. Yeah, that's like a pause moment because um I'm not sure what order I will do the actual episodes, but um
Mhm,
I interviewed Dr. MC
mhm,
last week and she
mhm,
had a similar story of how she was thinking she was going to go one way academically and
mhm,
then it ended up having to be a pivot. And so that's so interesting that you have a similar story where you were fully prepared,
mhm,
had this plan, plotted out, and
Mhm,
God said, "No, no, no,
mhm.
go this way." So that's
Yep.
awesome. I never knew
Mhm.
that. See, look, this is why I
Yeah.
had the questions. The questions are good.
That's
All
why
right.
you ask all the questions.
Right. So as an educator,
Mhm,
who comes from a lineage of educators, can you
mhm.
talk a little bit about the importance of education, especially within the Black community?
Yes, education is very important, and even if you don't, trying to say this correctly, um, education was always like withheld from us, right? Because the more we knew what people was doing wasn't right, right? Like
Mhm,
we knew, for example, if we knew that we really like, for example, the Emancipation Proclamation, like it didn't get to a lot of people to like at the end of like 1865, but once
right.
people started reading this, it's like, hey, this paper says I'm free. And
Mhm,
so it's very important that we are educated and know the things and being aware of things that are is going on around us. As I told used to tell my students, know who you are so somebody can't tell you who you are not. And
mhm,
so if you understand just like I said, being aware of what's going on around us, if you are not educated, somebody can tell you one thing and you just go with it. You just because it sounds right. And people can make things sound like anything, but if you
mhm,
don't do your work behind it and fact check, um you'll believe anything, especially with the internet. Like anybody can put anything on the internet and make it
mhm.
sound right. And you'll have people just going around saying wrong stuff. So it's very important that we receive some sort of education, whether that is in school, homeschool, you're receiving some form of education so you can at the very least just know what's going on.
Yeah, yeah. So I appreciate you saying that because that made me think of a follow-up question. So I'm using the word education very broadly. So
Mhm.
when I say education or when you define education, what does that mean to you?
Mhm. It just means the gaining of knowledge.
Okay.
And I heard someone say that when you're acquiring knowledge, you shouldn't have to pay for that, right? Like you know,
Mm,
we have things that's like our intellectual property, but if I'm giving you knowledge, I shouldn't be charging you for that, right? Education should be free. And so it to me that's what I when I think of being educated is you learning something that you didn't know before, and you not only that being able to apply, there's this thing, it's not Maslow, it's can't remember the guy's name, but it's a level, like the lowest level is just being able to repeat what you learn. The
mhm,
highest level is being able to apply it or extend it into new learning. And
mm.
so to me that's what we should always be striving to do. And so, yeah, so to me, it's just acquiring knowledge.
Okay, I like that. So acquiring knowledge and then being able to use this knowledge that you acquired, be able to apply it.
Mhm,
So gaining knowledge, be able to comprehend it, and
mhm,
then be able to apply it in subsequent um arenas. And I think that's
mhm,
really helpful because sometimes, depending on who you talk to, education is formal education, right? So you go to a school, whether
mhm,
that's, public, private, charter, magnet, whatever, whether it's homeschool, but in a lot of ways, just living life,
mhm.
is education. People talk about, yeah, I graduated from the school of hard knocks, or, whatever the case may be. Or my mom, she used to be big to say, like, they got a bunch of book knowledge, but no common sense.
No
So,
common sense or no street smarts.
right, so there's a lot of
Yes.
types of education
Mhm,
um that is important. And so I know when I initially asked you to be on here, I was thinking more formal education, but I
mhm,
want, listeners to understand and to know that we recognize that
mhm.
formal education is not the only form of education. So,
And there's so many people like that you can look that didn't get college degrees. They may have gotten their degrees later, but
mhm,
they became successful just by like either combining what they already knew and adding it to like you said, their common sense, their street knowledge. Like it's sad to say that you got a lot of drug dealers out here that could be chemists. Like,
Not can be, they are.
they are
They
right.
are chemists.
You got a lot of people out here that are entrepreneurs, like, and that's knowledge, right? They take what they know and they apply it and they gain something from it. And so, like, when somebody pointed that out to me, I was like, you know what, that's true. Like, that's what it is.
Right.
Like
Now
I said, you failed high school chemistry, but
right,
can weigh out this stuff and to the grunt. Like, it's
right.
so interesting how our minds can work when you don't have, as you say, the formal classical education. That just shows us that we have this level of brilliance that can come naturally, right? Like you said,
Right.
just by living life.
So true. And I just want to put a little asterisk in here. We are not supporting,
So,
condoning,
activity.
encouraging
Encourage
any
somebody you know.
we're not any illicit activity. That is not what we're saying. What we are saying though is that education, knowledge can present itself
Mm-hmm.
in various ways,
Mm-hmm.
and that we want to acknowledge all of them. Try to be so diplomatic.
Right.
We just want to acknowledge that. Okay. All
Yeah.
right. So, as we're talking about chemistry, mathematics, entrepreneurship, all of these kind of things, I know that your focus area, you said that you had spent 14 years teaching science.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think are some barriers to science and or STEM or STEAM, depending on who you're talking to, among our communities? Well, do you think there are barriers, or start there? Do you think there are barriers to
Um,
science and STEM? And if so, what do you think some of those are?
yes, I think there are a lot of barriers. One activity that I've done, actually, my doctoral work was around this. I called it Stematizing Social Justice. And
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to allow the students to see themselves in the science, right? As science teachers, we're taught like the science things, but we're never taught what goes on behind that. So one activity I have them do is to Google famous astronomers, and I have
Mm-hmm.
them make observations. And most of the time, you'll hear they're old and they're white and they're men. You may see one woman, maybe one
Mm-hmm.
black person, and then I have them Google famous astronauts, and they just look at the pictures. And they say they're younger, but still mostly white. You may see a woman in there, you may see a couple black people in there. And I have them draw their own conclusion. And I'm like, well, what does that tell you? That there are not a lot of us represented just in scientific fields. And so one barrier is the lack of accessibility, meaning they may not have like school, depending on what school district you're in, you may not have the funds for certain materials, you may not be able to afford textbooks, you just don't have the access to it.
Mm-hmm.
And then another barrier I believe is that we don't have ways so that our students could see themselves in what they're learning. So one lesson I did, and I think it's one of my favorite ones, is gender and astronomy, and we explore ways why up until like 1960 why there were no women astronauts
Mm-hmm.
employed in NASA. And we found out, well, a couple reasons, but we found out something as simple as toy marketing, to how they market toys. Like, I didn't know there were boy and girl Legos. And like some of my female students saying, yeah, I have every Lego box I've ever had a boy on it. Or
Mm-hmm.
the girl Legos are bigger and the things that you build are a lot simpler versus the boy Legos. It's more complex, the pieces are smaller. And it's just something as simple as that. For example, I wanted a microscope growing up, and my grandmother gave me a sewing machine.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now I can sew a button, but I wanted a microscope.
Right.
So it's just those how companies market things. It's probably gotten a little better now because like even in toy stores, or they don't have toy stores anymore, but the toy aisles in the store, it used to be a very blue aisle and a very pink aisle. And on the
Right.
pink aisle, you rarely saw anything that was geared towards science for girls.
Mhm.
So it can be things like that.
Okay.
Something that's really, really small, but we're socialized to believe that girls can't do science. And we're even
Mhm.
probably more socialized to believe like the only black astronaut I ever saw was Mae Jemison. And I knew nothing about Hidden Figures until I was an adult. Like I knew
Right.
nothing about Katherine Johnson until the movie came out.
Mhm.
And so like it's more than us putting, which I did, but it's more than us putting like posters of these sciences. That's a good start, but having ways where you can implement and integrate lessons like that into the curriculum so that students like us can see themselves.
Mhm. I love that. Yeah, I was thinking as you were talking, like, there's so much conversation that happens around certain scientists or certain inventors and I'm like, there's a whole world of
Hmm.
individuals who are African American, of African descent, like that no one you don't talk about it. Like it is not talked about. And so clearly that would be a barrier if their representation isn't happening or if, teachers aren't taking it upon themselves to
Hmm.
include that in the conversation. And then your point about the marketing, like I didn't know that about the Legos. Um about girl Legos being bigger or more simple versus boy Legos. So yeah, it's always interesting to me if anybody in marketing ever listens to this podcast. If y'all hadn't changed up, now would be a good time.
Yeah.
Because people lean into things that they connect with, and so if I'm not seeing pictures of myself
Mhm.
are seeing people who look like me doing this thing that I
Mhm.
maybe I would consider being a scientist or a chemist or a biologist or an
Mhm.
astronaut or whatever if I saw that
Mhm.
as a possibility.
Mhm.
The other thing that made me think of is, so are there areas of science, and just let me back up a bit. Can you say what STEM or STEAM stands for, just for people who may not know?
Yes. STEM, and some people use STEAM. STEM is science, technology, engineering, and math. And then if you use the word STEAM, the A is for art. So it's science, technology, engineering, art, and math.
Okay. I'm bad about them. Like when people know acronyms, we just throw them out,
Throw
not
them out.
not taking for granted that everyone
Right,
knows. So on the
right.
off chance that someone didn't know, I wanted to be sure about that. Can you talk
Mhm,
a little bit about what maybe are some non-traditional
mhm,
STEM or STEAM careers that either you're aware of or you would like to see being brought more to the forefront that might resonate with um, some African American people, or in particular African American young people?
mhm. I know one specifically is an area called fashioneering or fashion engineering, where
Mm,
people design clothes. So if for example, a designer knows that certain insects are attracted to certain colors, they may not, for that line, they may only bring out this certain amount, or if this type of material is harmful to the skin, they may use another type of material. So that's one I thought was really cool. I found out a few years ago. I know there are some culinary scientists that really break things down and know nutrients and micronutrients in food. There, this one young lady came and spoke to a group of kids that there are food scientists that know that the red spicy dust on hot flaming hot Cheetos is addictive. That's why they keep putting it on there
Hmm.
to for people to keep buying it. Like they know that there are some app developers that know based on how many times you open an app, increase like they take that data and design more apps to keep you to come back to those same apps. I know it's like a pastry. I forgot the exact name for it, but it was a somewhere it was along the line of like a baker or a pastry chef or something, but
Hmm.
it fell under the umbrella of STEM. And so there are a lot of like really cool and fun, non-traditional, you're not a doctor in a lab coat,
Hmm.
where you can get out and really perform whatever a lot of times, most of the times what you're interested in.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that is so interesting. I have never heard of any of those things, and they're all like, now I gotta go Google them. I
Yep.
want to know more. That is like so from the fashion, the food, the apps, like all of that is so um exciting. And those are definitely the conversations that I feel like at least the young people I know, and you probably way more dialed into that than I am. Like, okay, it's not like you said, just an old
Mhm.
man in a lab coat.
Lab coat,
Yeah,
like no.
yeah, that's like really, really dope. Yeah, I might have to have you back and we talk a little bit more um about some of those things. So as I'm thinking about that and thinking about helping um get the word out to our kids, how would you say um it would be helpful for us as parents or fellow educators or as the community? How can we help support our kids learning?
It's so interesting that as an educational community, we don't get that a lot from parents. Like every blue moon, like, hey, my son or my daughter is interested in this. Do you know any camps? You know any things over the summer
Mhm.
they could do? Definitely the like just Google African American STEAM
Okay.
or I used to have my students do a African American science project every year, and they had to George Washington Carver was off the list, and nobody could do him. Outside of him, they ain't know nobody else. So like I
Mhm.
had them do other things, and I also have a like file where you have a lot of different people of color and women that again have those real interesting non-traditional what we may think of as far as when we think about STEAM, like certain like job titles. I think as science teachers we have to be very dialed in, right,
Mhm.
to those how we can have those resources for our families and our community, and we don't do a good job at having those readily available. So I always tell people like just start googling like inventors and things like
Mhm.
that, and STEM careers and a lot of the like I said a lot of things that people do, like people play video games, some students or kids play video games all day every day and don't
Mhm.
understand how much money it is in game development. Like if you
Mhm.
just get your learn how to code, like you could be
Yeah.
making all this money instead of trying to make money playing it. Like you can make that's where the money is. And so
Yeah.
um and even understanding like if you notice that your student is really strong in like math or science, fostering that if you can, like if they're really strong in both, it's definitely an engineering career. And because those areas are so underrepresented, like you have so many colleges and universities that will just give scholarship money and probably um arrange for you to have an internship after you graduate. Like
Mhm.
so
Wow.
in those areas, if you notice something, even like I said, even in art now, art is becoming a part of the STEM family. And so you can do a lot with just going off of their interest and trying to find ways to foster that.
Yeah. Yeah, I know for those who listen who may not know me personally, I have a teenage son, and so there were there was a season there where he was getting these, I don't know what you call them, but there were these boxes he would get every month, and it would be some type of like engineering type activity. He would have to put something together. So he built like a little robot and like a little paint thing. And every month he would be like, why are you giving me this? This is stupid. But when he opened it, he would like really get into
Into it, yes.
doing the thing. And I'm like, yeah, I get these stupid boxes for you
Mhm.
because I'm trying to help you see that this is
Spark
actually
something.
something that you like to do. And so,
Mhm,
he only did it for a few months, but I think I would like to think it put a thought in his head, and it definitely helped me see, okay, well, he does like science, he does like building,
mhm,
the engineering, architecture. These might be things he'll be interested in later. So yeah, I love that you're suggesting that at bare minimum,
mhm,
we Google, find resources, tap in when possible to help our kids be able to access those kind of things. So I have a couple of more questions. So I know you're in more of an admin role now. But kind of tying into what you just said, as a former teacher, what are
mhm.
some ways that you wish parents had partnered better with teachers, or vice versa, that teachers had partnered better with parents?
As I was going into the later years in the classroom, I actually would say, how can I partner with you
Mhm.
in knowing your child, understanding your child? And I think I had a bigger response by saying that.
Mm.
Understanding that the parent is the authority on their child.
Mhm.
So asking them to give us feedback like, hey, what are your child's interests? Things of that nature. And I got a big response from that. And
Okay.
even as we went throughout the year, having some sort of communication, with parents other than like report card or bad
Right.
reports or anything like that. So, what are we doing in our classrooms? I think we did this during COVID and just continued it. We had like a little eighth grade. I taught eighth grade for 4 years, like a newsletter that just
Mm.
let parents know what was going on. And so I think just having that information out available to parents so that when their students come in, like, what you got for homework? Nothing. What you learned today? No, oh, you can read the news like, oh, in
Right.
science class, y'all learned about rocks. And this is what y'all need to be studying for. So and I wish parents would partner with us more on had like making their education a priority. I've been
Mhm.
in districts where we have a lot of resources, and I've been in districts where we don't have a lot of resources.
Mhm.
And at each time, like education, or at least middle school, high school is a little different because now you have credits and now you need to graduate. But middle school was not that high of a priority. Sometimes there are some parents, like I had one student that like got all zeros and he would be playing games on his iPad. And I said, ain't no way your mama didn't see your
Mhm.
no progress report. So I called her and he got a lot of his missing assignments together. But sometimes that just it flies under the radar with
Yeah.
them. So sometimes I feel like their educational activities took second to their extracurricular activities, like they
Mhm.
play soccer or whatever. I remember when I was in school, in my grade slip, I did two things: flag twirling and choir. And my grade slip one good time. I had to get one of them up
Right.
because it was just like I was always taught our education was number one.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that kind of ties in with what we were saying earlier about formal education versus other types of education. And for some people, formal education, depending on what is going on in life,
Mhm,
that may impact where that falls.
mhm, mhm,
So, for folks who are listening who may feel like, formal education is big to me, it's important to me, then, you may hear something that Dr. A said that you're like, okay, I can use that. I'll work with that. I'll partner better with my child's teacher. And you may be listening and be like, well, in the grand scheme of things, I don't know if he going to college, so it's not that big a deal. but it could still be helpful because it's a way to learn something. They could use it in a trade or some other way that you could still partner with your teacher, with
And also,
well, yeah, go ahead.
I was saying also say this, like I have a student in the eighth grade did absolutely nothing, but he wanted to play football. And in order for him to stay on the football team, he had to keep a 3.0 average.
Yeah.
And every year they have a ceremony for the African American students because of their minority in my district. And he would walk across that stage every year, and it would always, I would be so proud because I'm glad, I know he's doing it because of football, but I'm glad that you are living up to a potential that I knew you had. You just didn't, you didn't attain. So like if football is your child's thing, go for football. But please understand, like our bodies can break down. Like it's just have a backup or something.
Yeah.
So learning that lesson that football is life or basketball is life, but my studies can, if you want to get to a good school, your studies got to back up just with your football stats.
Yes, that's a whole nother, I got a question talking about student athletes.
Yes.
I will just say this real quickly because I do feel strongly about education,
Mhm.
but I also feel not but and I also feel strongly about knowledge. So I think those two things are different.
Mhm.
If sports is your thing, I agree
Mhm.
with Dr. A. That's great. And you're gonna have to know how to read a contract.
Right.
And you're gonna have
Hello.
to know how much percentage your agent is taking and how much money you actually gonna have.
Yep.
So there are things that you need to have knowledge about that you
Oh,
gain from education to do this thing that you feel really passionate about. So I am in complete agreement with you. If that's what you want to do, that's great. And there's still a reason why you need to pay attention in math class, science class, English class.
if
Go to
you want,
class.
if you want to be a singer, you want to be a recording artist, there should be a class for you to learn how to read a contract at bare minimum. If you
Right.
can't afford a lawyer,
Right.
that should be a part of your degree program. I don't know
I,
why.
I agree. So listen, it definitely sounds like you're gonna be back because we could talk about this whole education thing
Right.
in
What it should
so
look
many
like, what
different
it's not.
ways.
Yes.
Oh my gosh. So the last question I have, so we've talked about, how you got into this. We talked about students, we talked about parents. And so I just want to ask this one question about teachers. So again, clearly if a person is watching this on YouTube, they see that we're both Black. Um, we're both educators. And
Mhm.
we get what it feels like to be on the student side as well as on the educator side. So I know that your academic research, so your EDD focused on implicit bias. And so can you talk just a little bit about what implicit bias is and how teachers can demonstrate that and how that can impact our
Mhm.
Black students?
So there's this thing in K-12 education. I'm not sure if it's in higher academia, but culturally responsive teaching and learning, right? But I feel like the foundation of that is understanding our own bias. How can I be responsible to a culture that I might be biased against? And so implicit bias are biases that we have that we've developed just by everyday life. One, as I was going through my research and putting some things together for a workshop, I remembered that I had an implicit bias against young African American men that sagged. So the second you walked into my classroom, I automatically in my head probably didn't have as much interaction with you than like students who didn't sag. And so I began to explore where that came from. So growing up on TV, whenever you see someone like that on TV, like you would hear the word thug, gang member, like menace to society. No one ever said that, but that was the the general knowledge. I began to think about the conversations that was held in my household. Like none of my uncles said. I was around my grandfather. My father didn't sag, so I didn't see that around the men in my family, and so when I realized that, okay, this is something that I have, but now I have to combat it. I had to first begin to seek out people who could help me, specifically my science partner at the time, who was a Black male. And I had to be authentic and vulnerable about, like, hey, this is what happens whenever
Mhm.
I see a student who may sag, or a student who may, I'm not gonna say have a bad attitude, but may just have a negative view of teachers, or may have a negative view of school. And so he began to help me, and give me ways to, or strategies, if you will, to help like combat that. Like, for example, if I had one student that wouldn't listen to me but would listen to him,
Mhm.
say, like, you just remind them of their mama. And at this age, they're not trying to hear their mama.
Mhm.
But they'll hear a Black man, because either they may not be one in the home, or that's just who they identify with.
Mhm.
And so I believe an implicit bias is something that we may all have, but it only becomes dangerous when it becomes an explicit bias.
Mhm.
So the example I use in my workshop is, I have an affinity bias towards African American female doctors. I just prefer to go there. I feel like they know me better than like maybe a man or a white person or even a white woman. And I said, what would that bias look like if I brought that into my classroom? Now I have an affinity bias towards young African American girls. So I may like treat them differently than the white girls.
Mhm.
If the white girl late, I'll mark her down as a tardy. If the Black girl late, I may not mark her down as a tardy.
Mhm. Mhm.
And understanding that we have these biases, but being in safe spaces to say, I need to explore how I can combat that, I think is the first step for us to have a truly authentic, culturally responsive to teaching and learning. Because if we don't, we just, like, to me, we just spinning our wheels. And I
Mhm.
remember when we were getting trained in this, and I started doing the implicit bias work, and I'm like, why didn't we ever do implicit bias first? Like, that was the first, when I did a training, that was the first session that we had. And to me, that just makes a lot of sense. If I'm encountering, for example, an African American male that don't like to get yelled at, and I'm
Mhm.
gonna keep yelling at you, they're gonna shut down. And then
Mhm.
all of a sudden it's gonna be this until you figure out, I need to stop yelling at you.
Yeah.
So it's very nuanced, but you have to have people that's willing to do the work, because it can be very jarring when you admit, like, okay, I may have this bias, but people like to equate bias with races, and it's not the same thing.
Okay. Thank you for expounding on that and sharing a very um personal example to help us understand. So I definitely think I've said it 3 times now, so it's an affirmative. You're gonna have to come back for another. I got a question because we could just continue to delve deeper into a lot of this. But I just really want to thank you for this like extremely informative, useful, needful information. Thank you so much for
Thank you
sharing your
for having me.
insight, your wisdom. Do you have any final comments as we wrap up?
I don't. I'm excited. I remember when this was like, hey, you should start a podcast, and you did. So no, I'm so excited that this is a thing now. So yes.
Yay! Okay, well, awesome. Well, I can say that all of my questions, at least for this episode, have been answered. And I also want to thank all of our virtual family for listening to I Got a Question Conversations with Dr. S. If you haven't already, be sure to follow me on Spotify or Spotify for podcasters or Anchor or just however you choose to listen to your podcast. Or if you prefer to look at us, when we're having these interviews, be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel. So we'll see you next time with more questions. You know, I love you guys. Be blessed, Dr. S.
Bye bye.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of I Got a Question Conversations with Dr. S. Be blessed, Dr. S.